In this video, I'm going to show you how to create channel brand in motion design like this, using mainly text animators. Hi, I'm Adam Bennett, this is the video shop. There are lots of things I like about text animators, and if you're completely new to them, I'd recommend checking out this tutorial first, which is an introduction to the basics, and a walk through creating this animation. But there's one thing I don't like. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if it gets fixed in a future update of After Effects. We'll get to it later. I'm still a fan though, and I've explored how you can use them for abstract type. Here I want to look at using them for creating the sort of work which actually pays the bills. As always, you can find a link for the free project file for this animation in the description below. Okay, let's get started. So let's create this part of the animation. Got the number 1, which I'm going to type out a whole bunch of times. Actually, I'm not going to use the repeat expression. So we've got 23 copies of that number 1. Typeface I'm using is Helvetica New LT Com, size 400, and we'll set the kerning to 200. Then selecting that text layer, I'm going to add a scale property, and then rename the animator 1 to scale. So we'd like to name our folders. In advanced, we'll set the shape to ramp down and then drop the scale to 0. Can't actually see what's happening really here, so if we scale the whole layer down, S for scale, so we can see that's ramping down. To me, it kind of looks like it's ramping up, but anyway. Set the ease height to 50, so we can see that's tapering on the left. We'll add a new animator with opacity. We'll call this type on. And I'm going to set the ease height for this to 50. And then keyframe the end value from 100 to 0. So then that's going to give us a type on effect. Drag this keyframe out here. As you can see, it's not sort of crisp, so we've got the smoothness we can set to 0. And easy to use those keyframes, and then in the graph editor I'm just gonna, so you could actually use the typewriter text animation preset for this bit and tweak the settings. But I'm just doing it this way for now just to show you, but I'll actually use it later on. So now we've got the numbers typing on from right to left. Add a new animator, tracking, and then rename it tracking. And set the tracking amount to -150. Again, can't really see what's happening, but you can see here. And if we drag in and out the end value, you can see what that's doing. So I'm going to keyframe the end, 100 to 0, but have it based on words instead, and then you get this effect. I'm just going to drag this last keyframe out to about 8.5 seconds. Doesn't need to be too exact. Lastly, animate the rotation. So we've got a rotate animator. Set that to ramp up. And I'll set the ease height to -100, the ease low to 40. Keyframe the offset from 100 to -100. Duplicate that rotate animator, and we'll call this slide off right. Just get rid of the rotation, but I want some of the other settings in there. So we'll add a position property and set that to 3000 on the X. Then in advanced, I'm going to change that ease high to -20, the ease low to 100. So that's going to cause the letters to drift out to the right after they've animated. Just going to scale the whole layer back up. So we drag our layer over here, and we've got this effect here, which is what we want. Preview that. That looks okay. Okay, so now let's create these pink number ones, the second part. So we've got a new comp, but I'm copying and pasting the same text layer, just deleting the animators because we can use these ones, and setting the size to 750 and the kerning to -250, and then add a position animator. Give that a value of 800 on the X, and change the shape to ramp up and the ease high and ease low values to 100. And then we'll keyframe the offset from -100 and then go to about 1.5 seconds and then 100. So that gives us the little shimmy here. I'm going to rename this main animation because we're going to add some other properties to it. So let's add a scale property and we'll set that to 6. Gives us this. And then we'll add some tracking, set that to 50. So I want the numbers to slide off to the right once they've animated in, so I'm going to add a new position property and we'll call this slide off right. Set the position to 3650 on the X, and then the shape to ramp up. And then the offset, we'll have that going from 100 to -100. Set the ease high to -100 and the ease low to 100. And then we'll just move those keyframes. So our first one's at the start and then it's animated every 3 seconds. Doesn't matter about the end here where it goes a bit funny because we only need the first couple of seconds really. And yeah, that's what we want. So now we've got the two bits of that part of the animation. When I put them together, what I did was just tweak them slightly. So the first part, I've added some time remapping just to speed it up a little bit. So you can see here, the 220 keyframe is here at 2 seconds, so I've sped it up by maybe, like 30% or something, and just made it a little bit quicker at the beginning. Then this second part here with the pink ones, kind of scaling up. Just had them slide in on the X from over here, so you can see them sliding in from the right. You could do that with text animators, but sometimes when you're just putting the two pieces together, it's just quicker to keyframe things in the final comp. There's no right or wrong way of doing it, just personal preference. So that's that part of the animation. If you watched my last tutorial, you'll have heard me say I very rarely had to keyframe the properties that I've added to text animators. With this exception, tracking, for example. Well, here's another example of where you might do that. So we've got a new comp, gonna type the number 4, and our font size is 130, kerning set to -600. We want alternating black and white, but if I add the repeat expression to this, it's actually not gonna work. It's gonna make all the text white. I'm not clever enough to know why, so we can't use the repeat expression for this, so we're just gonna copy and paste it 8 times. And I want to start with a white number 4 and end with a white number 4, so I'm going to just copy and paste this first one. There we go, and now I'm going to add a property, scale, and keyframe it from 100, and then over 3 seconds to 7,500 scale. And then we'll rename the scale. Let's go into advanced, change the shape to ramp down. Let's see what that's doing. And more options. We're going to want to just adjust the grouping alignment to get the effects that we want. So I'm going to set that to -3 and -31 and just shift it over to the right here. Now you can see we've got some vertical lines there that we're not going to want, so we're going to have to get rid of those. We're just going to adjust the position. Just scrub through, see what that looks like. So yeah, those are the pesky lines that we want to get rid of there, but the rest of it looks okay. So I'm going to grab the pen tool and just make a shape that we're going to animate, just to cover that up. Let's get rid of those Bezier curves, we don't want those. And set the fill to black, we don't need a stroke. And then just keyframe that. And this doesn't need to be massively exact, because it's not the whole animation that it affects. But I'm just going to move this over here, and then that's kind of, well, it's covering up the letter, but we'll fix that in a second. But just want to make sure it's covering up those lines. So I'm going to duplicate our main type layer and just solo it. And then I'm going to add the typewriter effect, because we just want the first two letters, numbers. So we'll call this trim letters, that typewriter effect. It's actually typewritering the wrong way. So we'll just switch that from add to subtract mode until we get those last two. Let's just toggle transparency. Yeah, so we just want these last two characters. So get rid of those keyframes and then just sit those on top. That's fixed that anomaly there. So yeah, that looks okay. It's a little bit annoying having to do that masking, I guess, but I'm not clever enough to think of a workaround. And finally, just press U to reveal all the keyframes, and I'm going to use flow to just ease them all. And again, don't need the whole animation for this, just the end of it really. But it's this kind of trippy effect towards the end here that we're looking for. So just preview that bit. And we can even pre-comp this and time remap it. So yeah, that looks okay. Before we carry on, I need to acknowledge the work of DixonBaxie. They created this brand packaging for ITV channels over here in the UK. ITV2 basically shows Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz on a loop, which is no bad thing. And ITVX, frankly, I've got no idea. I think it's another streaming channel. A student of mine saw these and challenged me to create them entirely with text animators. I failed, but came pretty close. We'll move on to the other scenes in this animation in a second. But as always with this channel, I want to get motion design beginners out there to focus on the process, not just the techniques I'm showing you. So I'd recommend looking on DixonBaxie's website for some really good insight into how they came up with these animations. All I've done here is recreate them to show you text animators. You're also not seeing the trial and error behind reaching these outcomes. To see that, you can view the full workflow for this animation on my sister channel, Video Shop Long Play. As I always say, you learn a lot from playing and experimenting, so that's an important part of the process that you shouldn't skip. Right, back to the show. Let's look at this part now, the back soon sting. So we've got a new comp again, new text layer. So we're going to type out back soon.
I'll be back.
And make that title caps. Set the font to 50 and the leading, and then the kerning to -40. But I've just noticed that's the wrong font. Well, correct use of the word font for once, but this is 85 heavy extended. We want 85 heavy. But that's a good thing about text animators, we can change that. So I'm going to change it in the first two comps that we created. And if we hadn't used text animators, that would take an absolute age, but obviously it's a quick fix here. If I was halfway clever, you could have accused me of doing that on purpose to prove how easy text animators are to amend, but no, I'm just an idiot, and that was a total accident. Okay, back to this comp. So we'll change that to 85 heavy rather than the extended. And then we want to add an expression to repeat it. So I've got this expression here and repeat the line 7, but actually I want 1 repetition of the text. So yeah, there we go. Okay, so I'm going to set the position 270 on the X, 515 on the Y, and then add a position property. Rename this position. Set the position to be 1050 on the Y, and then go into an advanced. Change the based on to be words. And the shape we're going to change to ramp down. Ease high 100, ease low 100. And then the offset, we're going to keyframe from 100. And then go a second in and minus 100. And set our work area. Just going to ease use that last keyframe. And we've got this. So in more options, just going to change the group and alignment to minus 93. I can't remember if this does anything, but maybe when the letters scale up, change that to anchor point group in Word. Now we're going to add a line spacing animator. So a separate group for this. I'm going to call this position / line spacing, and then add a position property to that as well. So actually we've got line anchor and line spacing here, haven't we? To fix that. Yeah, let's get rid of that line anchor. Don't want that. I think I've added that by mistake. So line spacing, we'll set that to be 11. And we're going to set keyframes on these values. Go to 1.5 seconds. And then the position, going to set this to be minus 186 on the Y. And then the line spacing, we're going to set this to 13. I'm just going to move this down. So don't have to be too accurate about the position, just want the words to be animating in from the bottom. So we'll add another animator with scale and line spacing. And we'll call this scale and line spacing. Shock. Okay, so the scale we're going to set to 2700 and the line spacing 2050. Based on words, ease high minus 100 and ease low 100, and we'll set that to ramp up. And the offset we're going to animate from 100 to minus 100 over about 1.5 seconds. So we get this. So in the final animation, what I've done is brought that pre-comp into another comp, and I've time remapped it, just to slow it down a little bit and make sure that we end on the soon, sort of almost full frame. Then just added a couple of white players just to add a bit of interest. So this one's kind of accentuating the bottom to top movement, and then as the text gets bigger, the movement's more left to right. So you've got a white going across here just to make it a little bit more interesting. And then in the final comp, obviously tinted the colours. Then I've time remapped it again, just to slow it down a tad, so you can take in the text, even though it's it's quick, it's meant to be quick, but you can just take in that. It's enough time to take in the back soon text. I'll talk more about using time remapping in this video, so a little plug for that. It's a great workflow hack that I use a lot for fine-tuning animation timing. Okay, let's crack on. Okay, so on to this part of the animation. So this one's a great example of how you can use a load of properties under one animator. We've got we're back typed out a whole bunch of times. A job for the repeat expression, but I've just copied and pasted it. So using the same font as before, size is 750, lead in 650, and kerning set to -50. I'm going to set the scale to 32. And add a position animator. Call this main animation. And the position will put 1900 on the X. Set the shape to ramp up, and the offset we're going to keyframe from -100. And then 2 seconds in, set that to 100. Ease high 100, ease low 100. Which gives us this. Now we're going to add a scale property to that and drop the scale to 0. And then add tracking. And we're going to set this to -100. So just to give it a bit of continuous movement, we're going to create a new text animator group. So we're going to add a position property, and we'll call this lines moving. Set the position to be 1500 on the X, and then set the shape to ramp up. Ease high we're going to set to 10, and ease low we'll set that to 60. And the offset, I'm going to keyframe from -80. And then about 3 seconds in, we'll set that to 0. We've got movement on those lines, but different speeds. Okay, so let's look at the smeary letters. I'm going to keyframe the position over about 20 frames or so. Add some ease using flow. Flow is optional, just so it eases out. And then going to add an expression slider control, and we'll name that speed. As an expression, math.floor, open bracket, position dot speed, close bracket. So that's given us a speed value for that layer. And then we're going to add the minimax effect. Set the channel to alpha and color and the direction to just horizontal. And then we're going to add an expression to the radius. So we're going to pick that to the speed and then divide by 20. This 20 value is just, it's personal preference. Doesn't have to be 20, just whatever you prefer. It's actually extending out equally in both directions, as you can see. So to fix that, we can add a transform control. I'm going to drop that on. On the position, we're going to add an expression. X equals, and again, this 600, you can change that depending on where you want the character to start. And then minus, and then link to the radius value. And then y equals, and again, another arbitrary value, 500. We can change this later. Then just to finish the expression, x comma y. I am not an expression expert. So now that smear is extended out to the left. I might change this value here. So there, so it's starting there, extended out. As you can see, it's a bit It's a little bit janky here, but we can fix that just by trimming the out point of the layer. So Shift Control D to split the layer. You might want to extend out a bit further where it animates to. I think it's worth this trade-off for having just one set of keyframes with the smear sort of automatically applied, but you know, you could always keyframe the smear separately, so you could get rid of the stage of linking to the radius value of the minimax. You could keyframe that yourself. I quite like having everything on one set of keyframes. That's just me. Another problem. I'm just going to adjust the timing a little bit. Okay, fine. Let's preview that. Okay, I think that'll do. And again, we just got this problem at the end, so just trim off the last part. So as you can see here, we're losing the cutout part of the fall. So that's one of the problems with the minimax effect. To fix that cutout, I'm going to grab the pen tool, make sure that your text layer isn't selected, then trace that gap so it creates a new shape layer. We'll turn off the stroke. So we're going to alpha matte the type layer to that shape layer, and then inverse that matte, and then parent the cutout layer to our type layer so that it moves along with it. So obviously don't get that the wrong way around, that's a lot of pick whipping. So now our cutout layer is traveling along with our text layer, and we've got that bit of the fall still cut out. But again, it's personal preference, you might be happy leaving it as it is. So I was ready to upload this tutorial today, and then I saw this message from Kyle Hamrick. He rightly pointed out that it'd be great if everything could be on one layer, and suggested using fill and CC composite. So let's give that a try. Okay, so I've duplicated the comp and just added a background layer, and we've got our guide colors. I'm going to color the 4 yellow and then add a fill, and we'll make that pink. So now if we add CC composite, that should put the 4, okay, no, I think if we move the transform to the bottom, yeah, okay. So we're still getting the minimax is still going out to the left and right. There might be a way to push that 4 over to the right, but maybe Kyle can offer that solution in the comments. I'm thinking maybe if we just duplicate our text layer, it's all controlled with one layer, but we just have the yellow 4 on a layer on top. Okay, so let's solo that. We need to just get rid of the fill, and we can turn off the minimax. And then our bottom layer is going to be the smear, so we don't need CC composite. So I can just get rid of the keyframes on the top layer and expression link that to the bottom. So we're still going to have just one set of keyframes. The transform, I think if we just get rid of this bit, yeah. So now we've got, okay, it's 2 layers, but we've got the, so you're not having to do the cutout part of it, and you've just got the smear as sort of like a drop shadow layer almost. But we have got to change the text twice, which is not ideal, but we can, in theory, we can just expression link the source text. So let's give that a try. So again, everything, you can even shy this top layer as well once you've done this, but if we just pick whip the source text to the bottom layer, then everything's being controlled to the bottom layer. So let's just change that to a 7 and see what happens. Yeah, okay. So it's not the one layer solution that we were after, but yeah, that'll do.
That'll do.
Okay, so let's look at this part of the animation now. Before I start, I just want to thank Mauricio Ceballos. Ceballos, I've probably mangled that completely, sorry, who kindly let me use his animation as a case study. I saw this on LinkedIn and thought it'd be a really nice way to explore text animators, the way the text comes in. Actually, the animation on the dot that he's done and the bounce on the characters, a lot better than mine, but kind of rudimentary case study for text animators, it's quite helpful. So let's get into it. Okay, so I've already got the dot animated and bouncing on the letters, and the letters are static at the moment, they're not animating in, and just got their 3D layers, and I've got a camera move. Roving keyframes on the dot. I'm not going to do a tutorial on this, but you've got the workflow video if you want to refer to that to see how I did it. But if we look at the speed graph here, so dreaded speed graph, got roving keyframes. And then that dot's parented to a null with the bounce here, as you can see. So turn off that null. So I'm going to start by adding a scale property to the text. Drop that scale to 0. And I'm going to rename this animator scale up. Okay, go into the range selector, and we want to change the shape to ramp up. Then I'm going to keyframe the offset from -100 to 100. So just go back to the start of our layer. And then set it to 100 here. Okay, so we've got our text animating in. But to give the springy effect, we want to adjust the ease low, so I'm going to set that to 100. Okay, so they're kind of easing into place, but we don't want to scale them down, so I can duplicate that animator, call it scale down. I'm going to set this to 85. And then change the shape to ramp down. We want to adjust these ease in values, so I'm going to set the ease low back to 0, but the ease high to -100. And then we just want to offset these keyframes, so I'm going to drag them across. So preview that. So they're now sort of easing up and then snapping back into place, which is the effect that we want. I'm just going to adjust the size of the text now to compensate for that scale. So just bring in the kerning a little bit. Okay, so that looks good. So I might need to just micro adjust where the dots land in, but I can do that with the null. And then here on the N, so I'm using J to jump to the next keyframe. Okay, so that ball's now hitting the characters that we want it to, but we've got a problem. We've got an eye that's already got a dot, well, not a dot, but square dot on it, but we can trim that off. So if we add an opacity property and call this trim.
If I don't get some trim before the night's over, I'm a bust.
What?
And we're not going to animate this, we'll set the opacity to 0, but all we're going to do is just trim that off so that it's removing that eye. I want to get rid of the smoothness. And then let's just find where that trim point is. Okay, so 57. So this might seem like a faff. You might think it's easier to mask this off, but obviously if you change the typeface or even the font, that's going to throw any masking that you do. So as long as the text doesn't change to anything else, then this is a good way of doing it. We've now got a text layer with the eye removed. So to have the eye separate, because we want it without a dot on top, you can duplicate that layer. And then we'll go into the trim and then set it to subtract instead of add. So now we've just got that eye isolated. Oh, brilliant. I'm going to duplicate that letter, but obviously it's already got the dot on it. Just going to change it to a now, and then we'll scale that down. So got a duplicate of it just for reference for the height. Then add another scale property and put that at the, don't think it matters, but put it at the start, call that scale. And then if we unconstrain the proportions of the scale, we can just scale that down on the Y to here, that'll do. So now we don't need that duplicate, can delete that, that was just a reference. Okay, so we've got our two type layers, one with the eye removed and then the I or L separate. So now we want to change the color of the letters as the dot bounces in. So we can add a fill color animator, and we just want to change the color to black. Just going to toggle transparency so you can see what I'm doing here. Rename this color. And just drop the smoothness down to 0, and then going to animate the start value. Let me change the background color. Okay, so find where the dot lands on the 5. I'm going to change that to hold keyframes. And then just drop the start value until that 5 changes color. And then onto the N. And drop the start value again. A bit more. Okay. And the eye is obviously on a separate layer, so we'll add the same fill color animator to that. You could even just add the fill effect and keyframe that, but let's stick with text animators, shall we? Change the color again to black. Keyframe that. And we're just going to need 2 keyframes here. Change that to a whole keyframe. And rename this color. And now we've got our animation. Hold on.
Wait a minute. Hold the phone.
The dot's meant to make everything the same color, isn't it? Okay, right. I've got it around the wrong way. No problem. Text animators are easy to amend. That's what I keep saying anyway. Okay, so the eye, if I press U to reveal the keyframes, and we can take the fill keyframes and time reverse them. And that's a quick fix. Okay, so the main text layer, if we go into that, I'm going to set markers on this just to see where the keyframes are, because we're going to have to get rid of those. And if we bump the start up to 100, and I think the mode, if we change that to subtract, then adjust the end value, and then we should be able to keyframe this start to get them to change back to the same color. So let's just shift that back, and then here, so okay, so that 5's changing color, and then here we want the end to change to black. The dot, we can just press UU to reveal the attributes and just go in and change the fill color. So that's quick. And oh, okay, so yeah, so the eye, we just need to change those keyframes back. So we've actually inversed everything, but it's fine. So let's just change those. So I think that's a good note to end on. Embrace mistakes. I was going to do a final wrap up thing about how I put all the different things together into one edit, but that's really about just having like constant movement and using sort of like generic wipes to link everything together. But it's not particularly what this tutorial is about, but if you want me to go over anything, you can put a shout out in the comments. If you want to take a deeper dive than this, you've got the main workflow and you can look at that and see how I did everything else. And I'm happy to record another tutorial. Oh yeah, lastly, the one thing I don't like, or rather I don't understand why it's not a feature of text animators, a repeat function. I honestly don't know why After Effects doesn't have it. Like, you can add one with shape layer groups, for example. But like I say, maybe they'll add it in a future update. It's not ideal, but for now as a workaround you can use the repeat expression. But hey, I've just spent over half an hour wanging on about how great they are. So it's a minor issue, I guess. Yeah, I think we'll end it there. I'm off to the pub. Thanks for watching. See you again soon.